down. Thanks, Lily. Thank you all for being here at this Creative Response event. We're very excited about it. I'm very excited about it. These events on the back end take quite a lot of research to bring in the right people to give a response. And usually what ends up happening is we find someone with one area of expertise, a dancer, a musician, a philosopher, and they come in and they give their point of view. And then in the doing research, I found a musician and a scientist all in one. And I was like, yes, this is the one. So Dr. Heather Spence is a DC-based marine biologist, cellist, and gambist who uses science and art to harmonize human-environment interactions. And with that mysterious sentence, Heather, I just want you to take it away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So I actually have a question for you. So who here is a scientist? No one wants to admit that, okay, right? Who here is an artist? Okay, cool. All right, so and these are not mutually exclusive ideas. So I'm a marine biologist and a musician, and I combine these things together in my own work by learning about the ocean by listening to it. And I'm really excited to be here. I had a chance to look through the exhibit, and it feels kind of like a cabinet of curiosities from the future. And certainly in the marine sciences, we're thinking a lot about the future. And what is the future of the ocean, and what is the future of life on Earth going to be like? And it's really interesting walking through this exhibit and seeing kind of the types of themes and ideas that are in here of survival and, you know, the little things, the looking down into the microscopic, and that little things might influence big things. So it's particularly timely. So this year, so who's heard of World Listening Day? Yeah, now you have, and I hope that you will all celebrate it every year. It's on July 18th. Now, we should celebrate World Listening Day every day. But this year's theme for World Listening Day was future soundscapes. And this raises sort of an interesting question of what is the future going to sound like? And you could extend that out to the other senses as well. What is the future going to feel like, or smell like, or look like? And I think this is a question that we don't ask ourselves maybe as much as we should, because humans are not just actors on the ecosystem. We are part of the ecosystem. We are actors from within it, and we have choices to make about what the future might look like and how it might sound or smell or touch. And so that raises interesting questions of how do we want it to sound or smell or feel like? And I think that this exhibit really kind of brings that out as questions that we should all be asking ourselves about, okay, and how do we want to envision or sonify that future, and then we can ask ourselves, how do we get there? So as you mentioned, I'm a cellist, and I also play an instrument called the viola da gamba, which is an early Renaissance instrument. And but you might notice that the instrument that I have with me is neither of those things. So this instrument kind of wanted to come with me today. And it has a special story. This accordion saved a woman's life. She was stuck in a war-torn country, and she had to travel on a train, and she didn't have papers, and her father told her, play your accordion, and that'll help you get through. And so that's what she did. And playing the accordion and getting everyone on that train excited about the music that she was playing and so involved in it, and they didn't even think to ask her about her papers. And I think that this is just one of so many examples of the power that the arts can have in our survival. So she gave me her accordion, which I feel is a very great honor and responsibility to kind of share her story and the power of music. So I'd like to play for you a piece that she taught me. Anyone here play the accordion? Nice. All right, Jim. One of the things I liked about the accordion is that, who knew that that is what was missing from my life, but you hug it and you can feel it resonating, right? So, I'll make a few other comments and then I'd love to open it up to a discussion because I'd like to chat with all of you and have time for that. But I'll mention, I think one of the reasons why it was a good fit for me to come here today is a project that I'm working on called the Ocean Memory Project. And we are basically, so I have a background in marine biology. I also have a background in behavioral neuroscience. And I'm very interested in aspects of connectivity, whether it be memories transferred across generations or fish talking with each other. And I see all of these things as interconnected. And we're basically creating a new cross-disciplinary field called ocean memory. And it's interesting because we've had this experience that when we talk about, we'll, encounter someone, we'll say ocean memory to them, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I do that, and I know what that is, and here's what it is, and each person has a different idea, and it's great because, but it somehow this is fairly universally resonant, and we're in some of the early stages, but we're looking at this as a way to, in a more dynamic way, understand the history of the ocean, and then also figure out how we can make more resilient choices going further into the future. And as part of this project, I recently did a performance called Reef Recall for cello and sounds that I record in my research. I record underwater sounds of fish and shrimp and dolphins in coral reefs, and also noise from boat motors, which are unfortunately very prevalent, and kind of pulled these together in a way to explore the soundscape and think about how memories are stored and recalled in the ocean. And one other thing before I open it up to questions. Something that we basically all share is that we've started listening before we were even born. So a friend of mine was having trouble getting her kid to fall asleep, and I did a little research and created a recreation of what it sounds like to be in the womb. And it kind of filters out the high frequency sounds. You kind of have the nice rhythm of the heartbeat and gurgling and breathing. It's really quite soothing. But before we can see, we can hear. And vision is really important. One of the things I appreciate about this exhibit is the focus on that we have multiple senses, and let's use all of them and pay attention to them, because we're using them even when we're not paying attention to them. But when we pay attention to them, like if you go on a walk and you focus on paying attention to the sounds, it's just such a more rich experience. So with that, I'd love to have a chat.
Do you ever analyze these ocean sounds with instruments like the sonograph?
Absolutely. So it's interesting that the standard scientific method for analyzing sounds these days is to turn them into a graph, a visual graph. So some of us are working on kind of shaking this up a little bit, but certainly a standard way of representing the sounds would be to put them on a spectrograph where you've got time on the x-axis, pitch essentially on the y-axis, and then the colors represent how intense or loud the sound is. And so that's one of the ways that I use to kind of identify which frequencies have more stuff going on, or I can get to the point where it's like I see it in the graph, I'm like, oh, that's a fish, right? But I also think it's really important to listen to the data, so I do a lot of that. And sometimes you can hear things that you can't see on the graph. So it's interesting to me that ear training is not more a part of training for people who do that kind of work.
About 15 years ago, we went to Australia where our son and his wife were stationed for a while. And they were avid scuba divers. And so while we were there, well, we're not scuba divers, but they are. And so my daughter-in-law said to me, how would you like to go swimming with the wild dolphins? So we went down the bottom of King Philip's Bay and got into our wetsuits, got on this boat, and he took us out to the bay, hoping that he could find a group of wild dolphins, which he did. And he had two lines extending the length of the boat. So we get in the water with snorkels, and hold on to the line and listen to and watch the dolphins. But he said to us, when you get in the water, you want to hum because the dolphins like the sound of humming. Well, when I got into the water, I was so mesmerized by these wonderful animals, I forgot to hum. But they were spectacular in the wild. They really were spectacular.
Yeah. And so they're so attuned to sounds.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was doing some research on dolphins in an aquarium where there was like this underwater viewing area with a window, and I accidentally clicked my ballpoint pen against the window. Dolphins were on the other side. Immediately they're like, and they're like, what's going on? Because they make clicking noises as part of their repertoire. They're like, you're making a click over there, I gotta see it. And they're funny too because they have this long nose, right? So the glass is here, they come up to the glass, they're coming, and then they're like,
About 30 years ago, I spent a month on a dolphin language research program.
Really?
In Hawaii.
Great.
Lewis Herman was the principal investigator.
Yeah, sure.
And there were a bunch of folks there who were very sharp at it. And there were a lot of graduate students, and the competition for dolphin time was tremendous. But one of the things they were doing, they were using sign language to communicate human to dolphin. And they had, the computers were not fast enough to catch what the dolphins were, the noises they were making properly and things at the time. But there was one thing that we would do in which you would give one dolphin an instruction to go and do a certain behavior. The other dolphin was isolated from the first, visually, and you could give it a sign saying, do what she did.
Yes.
And it worked 90% of the time. And they were analyzing the sounds that they were communicating back and forth,
Exactly.
and they could, hey, what'd you just do? Yeah, well, I did that. Right?
Yeah.
It was astonishing. Yeah.
Because they have to be able to communicate that. Do you know about this? I think one of the things being worked on now is an iteration of that with a signal for do something new.
Yes.
And then to two dolphins, do something new together. And then again, they have to, what are you going to do? You have to communicate that, right?
Yeah, we had to do something new. We also had, there was a thing there to try to test, we would cover one dolphin eye, not the other, and give it a verbal signal, and measure the amount of time it took for it to respond. And then cover the other eye and do the same thing and measure it because they have left and right brain as well, and a corpus callosum, and our language center is in the left side. Is theirs isolated like that? In a human, there is a real delay if the signal goes into the right brain and has to be transmitted over to the left. And I never got the results of that. Do you know what that was?
I'll have to look back at it. I've done a lot of looking into some of the brain studies with hearing tests, and because of my suspicion, my suspicion is that it wouldn't be the same because they have some of these really interesting things like the unihemispheric sleep thing. So I would think that it's probably organized a bit different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll have to go back and check on that.
Yeah, I haven't Googled it in a while, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Dolphin brains are fascinating.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question about aesthetics and nature and how, at least in popular science, not being a scientist, we've come to understand that things like colors, and things that humans see as beautiful in nature have a purpose, that they attract, pollinators and this and that. Is there a correlation in sound and in the sound in the ocean and beauty and water health?
I mean, sort of, we all kind of know that there must be, right? But has science dealt with that in a way that makes sense? This is why I think science and art really need to go together, because scientists, if you well, you can't really separate. I mean, you kind of need to be able to asking these questions. And so that's why I like to bring together people with multiple different disciplinaries to talk together, because then they can have sort of bursts of inspiration. So, so actually we're having this conversation about dolphins in particular. So I had the privilege of bringing together a group for a panel that included a bioacoustics researcher, a composer who does sonification of data, so that's the same as visualization of data, only you're putting it into sound, a marine policy maker about noise pollution, and a cellist with the National Symphony Orchestra who has done work on music for cats, which is not really designed for humans, but you know, cats like it. So yeah, so we're investigating, like, you know, could we?
But this cellist has figured out that there's a beautiful sound for cats.
Well, of course. I mean, of course,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think part of the issue that we have with discovering some of these things is that we do things that are within our range of vision and our range of hearing, and they have a different one. So the things that they're going to be attracted to are probably going to be more in their range of vocalizations and hearing, and also like tempo at which they operate, right? So like which tempos do they like more, or how do they respond to different ones? Something that might seem fast for us might be slow for them. So.
In the time that you've been researching the sound of the ocean, have you noticed major changes other than pollution, noise pollution? Like, are vocalizations changing, or pitches?
Sometimes pitches are changing, I mean, so due to noise pollution.
Yeah.
So if you have noise pollution in a particular frequency, then animals may adapt their communication to be outside of that frequency. So that's a good survival mechanism. And there's sometimes that doesn't quite work, and so that's one of the things I'm trying to work on. I mean, if you need to find if you're out in the big open ocean and you need to find a mate and you can't hear them calling, like that's a pretty big bummer. So yeah, so there are some changes like that. It's challenging to study because there are also variations due to natural cycles. So seasonal cycles, right? But also like lunar cycles, day-night cycles. So you can have a lot of variation depending on the time of day, the time of year, what else is going on. So then how do you piece apart what is what is due to a long-term trend versus when you happen to get the recording? So I think it's vitally important that we collect as much monitoring data as we can, even if we don't have time to analyze all of it right now. Unfortunately, that's not a very sexy research proposal, but it's so important that we collect that data now, because then we can have a really long period of time to analyze the patterns, which is what we need to get at that question. And if we don't get it now, we can't go back and get the data. We can go back later and analyze the data, but if we don't have the data, you can't go back in time and collect it. So I'm trying to get this, to be more palatable for research funding, because certainly, it's like putting funds like, well, we're going to collect the data, but we're not going to analyze it. It doesn't sound very great, but it's really, really important to get those. Get those underwater microphones out there and recording what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that there are researchers who have taken satellite images of coral reefs and then gone to the coral reef and looked around and then began to develop a way to correlate the satellite image with the health of the reef. Is it possible to, in effect record a reef and then assess its health?
That is a thing I am working on.
Okay.
We do not have some like really standardized methods for that yet. We're getting there a little bit more on the terrestrial side of things, which usually happens. I mean, ocean science kind of lags a bit because it's really hard to work underwater. Things always go wrong, not the way you planned. So, but yeah, I think that, so one of the standard ways of figuring out what's going on under the water is like, okay, you do visual survey. So who here like snorkels or scuba dives? Anybody sort of a little bit? So you go out and you're like, maybe you're snorkeling or scuba diving and you basically count, like there's a fish and then you count it, And so there's a lot of interest in like, well, can, acoustic monitoring do that? And so there's a lot of work like, okay, well, yes, we can, we record a fish and we have a library of fish sounds and we can compare them and it's a match and we heard that fish. But I think something even more exciting that's going to come out of the acoustic monitoring is something that you can't really get with the sort of in situ visual monitoring, which is this sort of soundscape pattern assessment, which is more like what you're talking about with the kind of broad scale, remote sensing data. So so Bernie Krause, who was one of the pioneers in soundscape ecology, came up with, and came to it from music, came up with the acoustic niche hypothesis. So just sort of illustrate like how could this possibly work? So just as in a spatial environment, you expect the animals to kind of all fill in all the different nooks and crannies, you would expect that same thing from the tapestry of sound from a particular location. And so you might imagine that a disturbed soundscape might have holes in it or overlaps, whereas a more healthy ecosystem might not, in a sort of very general sense. Yeah.
How long have these baseline soundscapes been collected for? Because I started scuba diving 45 years ago, and the ocean has changed so much just in my lifetime.
Well, we do, there are some archival recordings, but the issues that tend to be for a particular purpose, right? So you're trying to get the sound of a particular critter. There's some monitoring that's been going on, but it's much more limited than we might have hoped it could be. And a lot of that's technological, and at this stage, I think it's an exciting time because a lot of the technical problems have been solved. So memory storage, it's been a big problem. And now, you can store tons on a little SD card, so you can leave things out for longer, collecting more data. We're still a bit limited in terms of power. So actually one of the things I'm working on right now, I'm doing a fellowship at the US Department of Energy. It's like, what is a marine biologist musician doing at the Department of Energy? But there's, within the Department of Energy, there's a section that deals with renewable energy, and there's a section that deals with marine energy, so from waves, tidal, currents. And I'm very interested to see, could small-scale marine energy be used to power ocean monitoring devices? So then we've already basically solved the memory problem. Then we would have solved the power issue. You could leave devices out potentially indefinitely. So that could allow us to collect a lot more data.
Yeah, and by the ocean memory, you're talking about collecting things now for analysis later?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of different facets to that project. But that's part of what I'm bringing into it. I've been working on. So my main focus is I've been monitoring the Mesoamerican Reef, which is the second largest coral reef system in the world. But who's heard of the Great Barrier Reef, right? Who's heard of the Mesoamerican Reef? Okay, great. It just doesn't get that much attention. It's located from the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula down to Honduras. And it's got a lot of pressures on it and also a lot of beauty. It just does. It's not making the news. And it's also not making it to a lot of scientific publications. So I've been working on setting up an acoustic monitoring program that will help to serve as kind of backbone to foster more science to go on in the region. And I've been working on that program since 2005. and with instruments in the water since 2010. So I have recordings that go back at least that far. Not necessarily all for the same location, you know, when you get a new director of a marine protected area, you know, sometimes you gotta, you know, shift a little bit,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I read that you're working around Cancun. Are you doing things further south too?
Yeah, so I'm working actually with, a lot of people don't realize, who's been to Cancun?
Yeah.
Who
Belize.
visited the marine protected areas in Cancun? Did anybody go snorkeling or at all in Cancun? Then you were probably in the marine protected area. They're just really bad at PR. There's actually three marine protected areas that surround Cancun. There are hotels located right on a beach that is protected area. But people don't know about it. So there's that. It's a hopeful thing though, because at least there are management systems in place that once we have, you know, good data to make decisions on, then we can use that data to help that area, because there's a lot of pressure in that region, but a lot of opportunity as well, because where you have people, I mean, that's a crossroads for the world. So I see that as an opportunity for research and spreading that around the world.
Yeah. I like Belize.
Yeah, that's good too. Yeah, there are ways to go. There are ways not to do Cancun, and there are ways to do Cancun. If anyone wants to go to Cancun, you can write me, and I'll let you know how to do it the right way. Yeah.
Question actually. So do you go to all oceans? Are you traveling around the world on all of this? Are there specific areas that you focus on?
My main focus area is the Mesoamerican Reef. Boy, does it need a lot of focus. But I go other places too, but that's where my main field research is that area.
And my other is how can young people get into careers such as yours?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually have on my website an Ask a Marine Biologist section. And I think it's really important for kids with an interest in this to kind of have a chance to figure out what is it all about, because it's not the same as like, oh, I want to be a doctor. There's like, you can look it up, there's like a path that you follow. Oh, I want to be a marine biologist. There's no clear path, because that can be many different things. And there are a lot of different ways to be a marine biologist, I think, or work in that area. And so one of the things that I try to mitigate, so there's a sense that it's a very competitive field, and I have heard some people kind of, you know, I guess, you know, a kid will come up and be like, oh, like I love dolphins, I want to be a marine biologist, and the response sometimes is, oh, well, you know, you'll grow out of it, oh, it's really competitive, why don't you, you know, try finance, you know, I mean, I don't know, it's just, do something practical.